Welcome to Apostolic Ministers Talk. Thank you for joining us today. On today's edition, we have Travis and Amber Worthington with us. They are church planters in Alexandria, Virginia, which is just across the river from Washington, D.C. It's been a tremendous journey for them, and they're establishing a great work here in Arlington, or in Alexandria, and so I'm glad to be able to be with them today. We were part of their church this morning, had a great move of the Holy Ghost. It was a beautiful thing, so glad to be here. This is Travis and Amber, and that's Cameron. He was a little bitter about something earlier, so he's joined us for the video shoot today. So why don't you take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you came from, how many kids you've got, how long you've been married, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, well, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary, which is fantastic. And we have two amazing kids, Mia, who is our 4-year-old, and Cameron, who is right at 18 months, or about to turn 18 months. And so we are just a great family, and we have been here in Arlington for 8 years in Northern Virginia. And so yeah, it's been fantastic. Almost shortly after we got married, we moved to Virginia. And so yeah.
And I am actually originally from DC. That's where I was born. And then I was raised in Florida most of my life, so Florida's home. And that's where we met, even though Travis is from Michigan.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's very awesome. So how did you two come to be in the church?
Yeah, I came to be in the church. I'm from Battle Creek, Michigan.
Okay.
And I had originally got in the church through my cousin. My cousin, when I was 12 years old, taught me a Bible study.
Nice.
And a series of Bible studies. And I grew up Catholic. And so after he taught Bible studies, started coming to church. And from a Catholic to Pentecostal is a huge difference, night and day. And so when we came to church, I was just blown away by this, and really kind of blew my mind, if you will. And then I started to explore and started to teach and say, hey, well, let me show you what the Bible says. And as I continued to go through that more and more, it really opened my eyes. And in January, when I got the Holy Ghost in January, and I wasn't allowed to get baptized for 4 months. And finally, in April, I got baptized, and then started going to church ever since. And then at 17, I moved from Michigan to Florida, to Gainesville, and I graduated from a high school in Gainesville, Buholtz, at 17. And shortly thereafter, 18 is when we moved to St. Petersburg, and that's where I met my future wife, and there she was. And so that's how I got in the church, is through my cousin and Bible studies.
Excellent, excellent.
And I was raised in the church. Both of my parents were saved in the Maryland, D.C. district.
Okay.
And then we moved again to Florida when I was about 4 years old. And then when Travis and I met, I was 16. I think I was 16 years old. And he was originally my youth pastor.
Very nice.
Yes.
Did you rob the cradle?
No, we did not. Let's clarify that for everyone's sake, since we're driving down memory lane.
Driving down, yeah.
No. When I first came, yes, I did come. My cousin was elected the pastor there, and I was evangelizing with him. And I'll never forget, we were in Raleigh, North Carolina, when he became pastor. We moved down, and then I became youth pastor shortly thereafter.
Okay.
We did not start even courting for many, many years after that, and there was no robbing of the cradle. I would think that
I think we started talking when I was 19, is when we started talking.
I was like 21 or 22.
We dated for about a year, and then we were engaged for about a year, and I was married when I was 21. So that timeline sounds correct.
Yeah, I got married at 23. So
Yeah.
yeah, that sounds about right.
Sounds
21.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, we were cruising down memory lane. And
Yeah. There it goes. Want to make sure it's clear, right? Clear. Not rob a cradle.
Exactly. So how did you end up in Virginia?
Great question. So when we were in Florida, my cousin is Matt Maddox, and he's the one that won me to God. His pastor was Bishop Cunningham,
Okay.
and Bishop Cunningham became his pastor when he was in Bible school in St. Louis. And so because of that ongoing relationship, eventually when my cousin resigned his pastorate, he felt that it would be best if we just made Brother Cunningham our pastor, since Brother Cunningham was always technically our bishop.
Right.
And so it just kind of made sense that since he was no longer in that role functioning, hey, just continue on in that role. And so I think either before we got married or right after we got married, that all occurred of him becoming our pastor. Perhaps even while we were engaged, that happened. So he was our pastor. We were actually licensed in Virginia as well. And although living in Florida, evangelizing, we were involved with boot camps, traveling around, teaching people how to teach Bible studies, how to win souls. And in that regard, eventually, about a year after we were married, we were kind of feeling a transition of some sort. How would you describe that season?
We were handed a transition in life. And so we called Pastor Cunningham and just kind of asked for his guidance and his direction. And he said, okay, I will pray about it, and I will give you guys a call back tomorrow. And the next morning he called us and he said, I felt like I was going to have to really seek God and seek the face of God and get some direction, and we could talk it through tomorrow. And he said, but I started praying, and instantly God gave me confirmation that that door closed specifically so he could open the door for you to come to Virginia and plant a church.
Yeah.
And because when we were being licensed, the board asked Travis, you're evangelizing now, where do you see your future? And Travis said, I have a burden for metro cities. And Brother Ray, who was the North American Missions Director at the time, was outside of our meeting before we came in, and he had showed us all the list of cities that needed churches, and Arlington and Alexandria were on that list.
He was a good director.
Yes.
Here he had a young couple, and he was trying to recruit us, even though we're living in Florida.
Right.
Beautiful, sunny Florida. And he was recruiting us, saying, what about this? This city's got 200,000. This city's got 250,000. And so, in that, he was doing a great job.
And so Travis said, he just threw it out there. He said, you never know, maybe we'll plant a church in Alexandria or Arlington. We had never been to either of those cities. And so then, the board meeting went on, we were licensed, and that was probably 2 years before this phone call with Brother Cunningham. But he said instantly, God told him, this is to bring you to Virginia to plant a church in Arlington, Virginia. And so he said, buy a flight and come up here the next week and we'll talk it through. And probably 2 weeks later, we had a U-Haul full of stuff coming to Virginia.
Yeah. It was 4 days later. 4 days later. We had that conversation on Monday. We were in his office on Friday. And having that conversation, and then 2 weeks later we were packed up and moving to Virginia.
Wow.
And obviously that was a big step to take to move this direction. Yeah.
Which it was totally a God thing, because we had literally, when we called him, we were sitting in an apartment full of boxes. We had just moved into a new apartment. And so that was, part of the crisis that we were calling him about. We just moved into a new apartment, like what are we supposed to do? And then he tells us, you need to come to Virginia, and we're like, we just signed a lease. But we went to the office, and never heard of this before. They had a policy where if in 30 days you wanted to move out for any reason, you can move out with 0 fees.
Wow.
And you just had to say, we just don't want to be here anymore. And So we broke our lease with 0 fees and hardly had to pack because all of our stuff was still in boxes.
Yeah.
Yes. and
Wow.
and then away we went.
Definitely a God thing, man.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely a God thing. So you've been here, what'd you say, 8, 9 years now?
We lived in Chesapeake for a year.
Right.
And then while we were in Chesapeake, we continued to evangelize, and then we drove up to Northern Virginia.
Right.
Week after week after week, and I believe we did that 42 weeks.
Wow.
And that is not an easy drive.
No.
From Tidewater to Northern Virginia. To put that in context, usually without traffic, it's 3 hours.
Right.
From Chesapeake all the way through. Most of the time, there's some form of traffic, whether you're going to hit through it in Tidewater,
Yep.
or Richmond,
Mm.
or Northern Virginia,
Yeah.
which Northern Virginia is famous for its traffic.
Yep.
And so you take 4.5 to 5 hours sometimes to drive up. And we drive up, meet people, and then drive back. So we lived in Virginia now for, I want to say, 9 years, and been in the church. We just celebrated our 7th anniversary. So
7th anniversary
Yeah.
here in Northern Virginia. Fantastic. So I want to just sidetrack for a minute and talk about another aspect of your ministry here. In addition to planting the church, you were elected to the Virginia District Youth Secretary's position. Then you moved on to Youth President, which is something you currently hold. In addition to all of that, you're working a full-time job, and she's working a part-time job. So obviously, if I wore hats, it would be off to you. I don't wear hats. I have a lot of respect for you, but I want you to share with us how you juggle all of that, plus family responsibilities, and maintain sanity.
You want me to go first on this one? Yeah.
Okay.
I would say that is that's a great question. That there is a lot of moving parts, and I would say that first and foremost, I have an amazing wife
Mm-hmm.
who truly is the backbone of all of that. And if you know Amber, then you know that she is just awesome
Mm-hmm.
in every regard, and literally through every step as we've added more and more layers. When we first came here to start the church, we had no little ones, and now we have 2 little ones.
Now you have 2 little
And we were not involved in the district work.
And he's still a little bitter about his nap, I think.
Yes, he is.
Anyway.
And I will say that as we've added more and more, it has become an interesting, once we seem to get in a good groove,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to evolve to somehow. And so I will say that, honestly, my wife is the most amazing part. We do ministry together
Mm-hmm.
in every regard. And when I was approached about, hey, you should run for youth secretary, and we want this to happen, my very first call was, of course, to my wife.
Right.
And said, do you want to become youth secretary?
That's what you said.
And that's what I said. And then when I was running for youth president, I said, hey, do you want to be youth president? And I think that from all of the things that are going on, it is a juggling act,
Mm-hmm.
constantly juggling. And I think that it is, from my view, dependent on a lot of moving parts and great people and teams. I have a lot of great people that are around me. And the running joke is that I am just a figurehead. I'm just the person that's kind of at the steering wheel, but I don't know if I'm driving the car. And with that, we have a great church team. We have a staff of about 15 to 20 people, and they make it happen. And I try to lead leaders, empower them, and teach them, and then release them. And so there's times where things are going on, or they come with an idea, and I try to get them operating in their passion. It's my job to equip, empower, and release those people. And same thing on the youth department side. We have about 22 people on our youth committee for the Virginia district. So my job is to lead them as leaders and let them go.
Right.
And there's times where I'm not necessarily running every aspect. I don't know all the details. I'm happy to say I don't know the details, but I know who does know the details. Often it's my wife, or it may be a secretary, but I highly value a bunch of people who are very administrative, who are so good, and they really make it happen in every area. And so I would say, and as far as family, I try to be where I am. So when I'm at work, I'm at work. When I'm home, I'm home.
Right.
When I'm in office hours, I'm trying to be in office hours, and I'm very specific. But the other thing I will say, and then I'll let Amber answer this, is that I feel like it's always a passion.
Right.
And it's not necessarily work. If you love doing it, then it's not necessarily work, right? Like I love hanging out with this guy, and I love to be impacting into our district, seeing where our district is going, seeing what's happening on a local level, and seeing how our youth's growing. We just got out of our youth convention. We had 575 people there, just tremendous. Our camps, and I am impacting people. I think the value of understanding that I am pouring into people, and when I'm pouring into them, I am literally investing into them, and they are going to make a difference with people I can never touch.
Right.
So it's really a big picture, macro sense of, you know what, I could focus only on my little box, but by not focusing on my box and taking a little bit more and spreading myself a little and empowering and investing, I am investing in future church planters and evangelists and missionaries and kids that will completely change the Virginia district. They'll go to cities I could never go to. Right. So being very intentional about saying, hey, I'm going to do this is a passion of mine, because I realize I'm literally impacting the kingdom of God, not just in our church, but also in the kingdom. What would you say about that?
I would say also, kind of you said about having a great team. I think our church fully supports us being involved with VDYM, and they so when it's our busy season, they really take care of all of the details at home. And they're great about respecting that and encouraging that and supporting that. If we didn't have a church that was so passionate about VDYM and She's for Christ and the things that they are connected with, then I think it would be harder to spread it out a little bit. But our church is super supportive and encouraging, and that makes a huge difference in being involved in both of them to the fullest.
So what would you like to say, let me put it, what would you like for an older generation to know about your generation?
I think that's very important that the older generation understands that a younger generation wants them involved. Mm-hmm. It is not necessarily this. It's not necessarily us versus them. I would say that oftentimes I have gotten the impression that a older generation thinks that the younger generation is just trying to push them aside, and like that, trying to push me aside, right? But that's not the case at all. I think that the younger generation values the voice and the wisdom and the direction of an older generation. I think the older generation has done a great job empowering, at least in my experiences, empowering and having dialogue, where it's not, let me tell you what it is, but let's discuss why. Right. And I think that adds such an element of respect. Right. And I think that from a generation of millennials, they have grown up in a completely different culture of maybe an older generation, or an older generation that said, you don't have a voice, do as I say. Mm-hmm. You're going to do this because. Mm-hmm. Perhaps maybe even a generation that would think such as to the degree of, well, I'm just going to tell you and you're going to listen. But this generation has grown up with participation,
Right.
Participation awards. You get a ribbon for showing up. It's not who wins or loses, just as long as you play, right?
Right.
So their mindsets a lot of times can be participation based.
Right.
But I think that the dynamic is they need to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
If they are involved, the younger generation will be invested.
Right.
And they want to be involved in the conversation. They don't have to be right in the conversation, but they do want to be at the table.
Right.
And if they're at the table, what will happen is you find buy-in occurs.
Right.
And that's where I think that sometimes having that buy-in is the collaboration.
Right.
There's wisdom there of, we want to hear what you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be a part of this. Why is it like this? Tell
Right.
us why we're at this place. Oh, well, I didn't know that. Well,
Right.
now that makes sense.
Yeah, that
We
makes
agree.
That makes a lot of sense. What if you were talking to a young family about the call of God, who was feeling the call of God to step out and plant a church? What would you tell them?
Oh, you want to start with that one?
Well, I feel like the two things I would tell them off the bat sound like they contradict, but once I explain them, hopefully they don't. Because number one, I would say, don't wait until everything is perfect. Don't wait until you have everything together, because we certainly did not. And if we had waited, who knows if we would have ever started the church. But number two, I would say make sure you have a strong support system. So not everything has to be perfect, but having a strong support system, I think, makes the world of a difference, because planning a church in the beginning can be super lonely. And so you need to have that support system that will encourage you and that will lift you up and that will help you. But you don't need everything else to be perfect. You don't
Right.
need all the finances. You don't need, you don't have to have, your skills don't have to be perfect. I mean, when you're reaching people, they just want to know the message and they just want to be loved. And so if you start that way, you're going to eventually build a church. It might be slowly but surely, but you will build a church.
Build a church, yes.
Yeah, I would add on to that, and I think from our standpoint, we would have never made it if people didn't support us.
Right.
More emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
friends. I will say financially. There were pastors who would send a check, and people would support us monthly. We are a daughter work of Bible World, Brother Cunningham. If it weren't for Brother Cunningham, if it weren't for Brother Staten is my neighboring pastor. We're the only two churches in the Beltway. We're the
Right.
only English-speaking church on the Virginia side of the Beltway of Northern Virginia, which you're talking is just in the Beltway 600,000 or 700,000 people, and so we're still the only English-speaking church. There's now a Spanish-speaking church in the Beltway, and so I would say, but Brother Staten was such an impact, where he would come over. He sent a family over to us, and was such a benefit to us, that when the church was in need and the church was struggling, he sent a family to let him be a blessing to you.
Right.
And if it weren't for that, I'm telling you, I don't think the church may have made it.
Right.
And so, having those relationships with neighboring pastors is critical.
Just valuable.
Absolutely.
Valuable. So what are some of the ups and downs that you've had in this whole process of planting the church here in Northern Virginia?
Well, I would say, to add on to what I first said about the support system, if we didn't have the support system we did, we wouldn't have gone off the ground. But I do wish that we would have had more people, like, now they're encouraging launch teams and having teams, because it was incredibly lonely in the beginning and super easy to get discouraged. And so that would have made a monumental difference, I think, for us. Just morale and feeling like not everything was on us, and just having sounding boards and people who understood what we were going through. So
because you guys really did come here, just the two of you.
Two of you, and we had literally never been in the city before. Like, we drove in, like, okay, so this is where we're gonna live. This is where, so like, we weren't familiar with anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would say some of that our lessons. I've shared when I hear church planners are going to start a church. I say, well, let me tell you probably what we did that you shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And I think that not only had we no team, it was just us parachuting in. I think that the dynamic of an urban area in the Northeast is crazy different as well.
Oh yeah.
The people of Washington D.C. are it's a different culture area, right? And I mean, if you think about that, there's 6 million people. It's a very transient area. I think that some of the ups and downs, I will tell you one thing I would share, which I could talk at length about all of the ups and downs of starting the church and some of the things that we did right and some of the things that we wish we could probably do differently. But I will say that when we came in, we needed to understand the culture of the area, and we needed to understand that we're not in a comparison with other places. I think that when you start to compare your work with other people, it creates downs that don't need to be there. It creates valleys that you shouldn't even have to face. You're already facing enough, rather to feel discouraged because person X and person Y are having revival and person Z is blowing the roof off the place, right? And they're running 150 and you show up on Sunday morning and there's 12.
Right.
And you come home and you think, what am I doing? And those 12 people, none of them are Pentecostal.
Right.
You say, clap your hands and you may get a golf clap of 2 and hey, I've done a good job. I clap my hands, but and you come home and I think that's the danger of comparison, and I think that's the danger of even promoting on social media.
Right.
You create this culture of, oh, look at me, or you ride a wave that doesn't have to be there.
Yeah, you create an illusion.
Yeah, and that's such an emotional roller coaster that you don't want to do this. One of the questions I know everyone hates, and I'm sure everybody watching this knows, is, hey, where do you run it, brother?
Yeah.
Those are questions that are just things that add more pressure and stress that don't have to be there. And so I think sometimes that's a down that I faced, especially because I had dear friends who were doing a great job, and it for a season caused me to resent them.
Right.
Well, if I was in that city, I might have that, or if I had the resources they had, then I wouldn't be, running 18. So I think part of it then came to the realization, I'm not in comparison with them.
Right.
And when I start to realize, if I only pastor 15 people and that's what I'm doing, I'm pleasing God, then you know what? That's me, and I'm okay with that. And once I became okay with me being wherever I am, I wrote down a mission statement. The mission statement was, my success does not depend on numbers. My job as pastor is to lead people to fully please God and to help them move from point A to point B to point C. Once I realized that, numbers is out of it. No. And I realized that's my job.
Right.
It doesn't matter if there's 500 or 50 or 5. It doesn't matter.
Right.
As long as I'm doing my job, that's what I'm called to do. And so that freed me from a very taxing, down, emotional valley I experienced. Anything you want to add on that?
I spoke first.
Oh, okay, good.
I was talking to a church planter one time. Yeah, she spoke first.
Sorry.
I was talking to a church planter once, and you mentioned about the numbers thing.
Yeah.
Somebody asked him how many he was running, and he said, well, I ran, and he named the population of his town, but he said only about 20 of them showed up.
Yeah.
So he put a little context to it, And you've somewhat answered the next question, because in some of the things that you would change, because I was going to ask you, knowing what you now know, or at this moment, if you were planting this work today, what would you do differently? And I think through some of the conversation over the last few minutes, I've learned some of the things you would have done differently. You probably would have tried to have had a launch team come with you.
Yes.
And
gone through launch.
And gone through launch and a few other things to help you plant a church in probably one of the hardest areas in the United States to start a church. I get to travel all over the place, and I go to a lot of difficult places, but I think in living 2 hours south of the Beltway, well, that depends on traffic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could take 5 hours. I get a sense of just how difficult it really is in this metro area of Washington, D.C. Because you're dealing with a political climate, you're dealing with a transient society. There's a lot of things that are in this mix we call the Beltway.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. So, take a minute and just say something to a future or present church planners about what they should expect in planting a church.
I will say that I think that you want to have plans, and I think, but you should write your plans in pencil. I found an old notepad of things that I had planned to do. By year 2, we were going to launch our second church. By year 5, we were run 500. You have an idea, but it may not always work the way you want. So I think being flexible. I've always tried to fail fast.
Right.
So we try stuff, and we're very fluid. We understand. Hey, we're gonna see what works. And I think that one thing that I wish I would have done earlier is create a systematic discipleship approach to move people into becoming, I think, dynamic disciples, really, of following what that process looked. Brother Gleason's book is just fantastic. And I would highly recommend his one on discipleship. And I think we read through that, getting a process in place, moving people. In our first few years, we would average about 200 to 250 first-time guests. Right. So we're still constantly working to close the back door. I think those are all things that I would find to be very important that you should do. Getting a team and a culture, that is very, very important. We are hitting on all cylinders now in terms of our team, and we have we have a fantastic team, and so I'm very, very thankful for all that they do. I would say those would be some of the things I would say.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
If you talking to a future or a present church planner about what they should expect in planting a church,
I would say there's absolutely no greater joy than completely
having kids.
Can we harness that energy?
Than having kids. Having type A kids.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start that over. There is no greater joy than knowing that you have completely altered and changed somebody's life, and not only their life, but their family's lives and their future children. There's nothing more fulfilling than that, and there's nothing more fulfilling than knowing that you have built something that will outlive you.
Right.
So wherever our paths may lead in the future, this will always be something that can be a lighthouse to this area.
Right.
That, as all of the tears and the effort that went into it was absolutely worth it if, we can leave behind a truth-preaching church in this area. And then I would also say, as a piece of advice, is always trying to always work yourself out of a job. And so constantly mentoring people so that, there shouldn't be any positions that you're not trying to work yourself out of and grow somebody else behind you, and figuring out what people are passionate about and letting them run with it. We have ministries in our church that probably day one we would have never even thought of, but people have come that are passionate about it, and we give them the resources they need and we let them run. And there's no position that him or I started with that we don't want to work ourselves out of and have somebody else running that. So, be quick to empower people and trust people, and don't put everything on your shoulders, for sure.
Yeah.
Because that will burn you out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And touched on a little bit of one of the final questions here. The last question before I hit some of the rapid fire questions. If you had the opportunity to sit with a younger generation who is aspiring to ministry or who is just starting in ministry, what would you want to say to them?
So repeat the question one more time.
If you were to had the opportunity to sit down with some young ministers who either they're aspiring to ministry or they're just getting started in ministry, what would you say to them?
Boy, that's a great question. I think that you should constantly be growing yourself. And you need to be growing your capacity, but also not just your capacity, you need to be growing your character, because capacity can take you far, but character will sustain you.
Right.
And I think that's where understanding I need to be very intentional about that. I am an avid reader. I'm constantly growing and researching and having conversations of how do you do this or what does this look like. I like to challenge myself, to sharpen, to see what I can do better. How can we make a difference? How can I get better? How can I lead people better? How can I be a better pastor? How can I be a better dad? Ooh, sorry, buddy. How can I be a better dad? How can I be a better husband? I think that's a dynamic I would tell them, is that you need to continually be growing, and I also think that you need to be investing in other people.
Right. And
that's where that comes into, is I'm constantly investing. If I am growing but I'm not investing, it's really sad. If I am going on the mountain but I'm going alone.
Right.
And so I feel like I always want to take people with me.
Right.
And so I'm
take somebody with you.
Yeah, and I'm constantly trying to say, what does this look like? How can we go in this together? How can we move in this direction together? And I think that you need to aim big, and you need to develop teams, and you need to be intentional about that. I think that you should have lots of people on your team towards your vision.
Yeah.
And I have a big vision and lots of goals, but I think that only happens when we get the team moving and growing.
That was a good save, by the way.
Yeah, right. Too much. Too much.
You want to add anything to that?
Yes, I would say two things. I would say number one, make sure you have a multitude of counselors, mentors in your life that can not only encourage you and give you guidance, but can also tell you if there's some weak spots, if there's some things that you need to be aware of, that you need to fix, that you need to increase your integrity on. I think that's really important, to never do ministry alone and to always have people above you that are pulling you up. And number two, I would say a motto when you start ministry should be, and should always be, but see a need, fill a need. And so, you should be above anything, and wherever you see that there's a need in your local church, then you should be the first one to sign up, doing it. And you should be mastering every single ministry in your church and growing in every aspect. That you shouldn't be so tunnel vision when it comes to ministry. And, you should be the jack of all trades and be a huge help to your local body until God tells you otherwise.
And I would add on to that too, in terms of you should be submitted to somebody, and I believe that what you model is what you'll produce.
Right.
And I think that's the one thing I would make sure you tell us is, what are you modeling?
What are you modeling?
Are you modeling that submission? Am I modeling that servanthood? And I want to model what I would love to be produced. And I feel like now the running joke is, man, I could be the best saint. I would be such a good saint. Now that I pastored for 7 years, I would just be like, whatever you need, pastor, and I feel like I say that with some sincerity, because on the flip side, I've understood, man, if I only had somebody that would think like this or do this. And so I'm constantly trying to model that. And I would encourage other people to do that. You should model those things so that other people see, hey, that's the way it should be.
That's the way it should be. That's awesome. All right, so the final question is just some rapid fire questions that are just about you personally. So what's your favorite drink?
Coffee. I drink a lot of coffee. That's the other secret to success. Too much coffee. Lots of caffeine, lots of sugar. Secret to success.
My favorite drink is much healthier. It is a venti peach citrus white tea infusion from Starbucks with 7 pumps of sweetener.
7.
But it's a venti, so it's not that sweet.
What's your favorite food?
Oh, pizza. I eat a lot of pizza.
A lot of pizza.
Love pizza. Good pizza.
Mine is Mexican. I could eat Mexican every night of the week.
And a favorite pastime?
What are those again?
Yeah, those are really
good. Let me add that to my list of youth president, pastor of the church. No.
I don't have a lot of those. I would say probably Michigan football is my fall on the sword moment there. Probably. I'm a big Go Blue guy, so and my quote is I only get 12 a year. That's it. So that's it. Only 12.
I would say mine is anytime that I can have a grown-up conversation, an uninterrupted grown-up conversation. I'm a happy person. Yes.
We got one trying to get on the loose here.
Yes.
So, what is a bucket list item that you would like to do in life?
I'll let you go first.
Well, mine used to be to go to Venice, Italy, and we just checked that bucket list item. So, my next bucket list item would probably be, I don't even know. I need to come up with a new bucket list. Skydiving. I've always wanted to skydive. Yes. I want to skydive. That's next. Make it happen.
I'll get you a one-way shot on that. I would say for me, probably a bucket list would be going to Israel is definitely on the short list of bucket list things I'm really planning to do and excited to do is next. Going to Michigan's national championship and we win would be one, but we'd have to get there first. That would be a bucket list to win one.
There you go.
We'll see though.
I don't know, for some reason I think I could picture you skydiving.
Oh, I'd love
she
it.
would.
I would do it in a heartbeat.
In the free fall with the goggles on, I don't know.
I'll send you the video once I do it.
Let me know when. I'll come video it for
you. Will you jump out of the plane?
Oh, no.
Oh, I thought you said when you said y'all video, that's what you'll do.
No. I'm not jumping out of a perfectly good running airplane.
I agree. Good luck.
Good luck, yeah. Well, hey, thank you all so much for taking the opportunity to sit down with me today.
Our pleasure.
And talk about your life and ministry and how you came to start a church here in Alexandria. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot. And thank you all for watching. And we'll see you next time.
Cam, say bye-bye.
Say bye-bye. Can you wave
bye-bye.
bye-bye to the
bye-bye.
camera?
Say bye-bye.
Of course not.